Welcome to the racing section of Comedy and Sport. A lot of people think that the home of racing is at Newmarket, the headquarters of the Jockey Club. But as people in racing will tell you, the spiritual home of racing is in the Surrey village of Esher. And the centre of that spiritual home is here, at the world famous Albert Arms. So here we are in the restaurant at the world-famous Albert Arms. Mere 2 minutes from Sandown Park Racecourse. And in this corner table, on 3 occasions before Arkle won the Whitbread Gold Cup, Pat Taff would sit down for breakfast. On all 3 occasions, it was the same menu. He would have wholemeal toast with no butter, some lightly scrambled eggs, and 12 pints of Guinness. In fact, you'd be amazed at the famous faces from the world of racing that you can meet here in the bar at the Albert Arms.
No, I will not be overruled. We have here the greatest jockey the world has ever known, a man who transcends sport. You've got, for instance, Don Bradman and PBH made, Tony Locke, the great bowler, Stanley Matthews and Georgie Best, Muhammad Ali as a boxer, Clive Lloyd in the field. There are certain Montana when he's throwing for Kansas, fantastic sportsmen who are above the sport. The greatest jockey here. So, no, I'm not embarrassing you. No, I am going to be heard on this one. You were the greatest. To watch you on a racehorse at a fence was a joy that will never leave me. A sublime feeling. You didn't have to bet in the race. Just watch John Francome, the greatest jockey who ever rode.
You are such a plonker. I promise you, every time we meet, we go through this rigmarole. It's like 3 continual cassettes of how great you are, this, that, and the other. And then by the time I've driven him somewhere, it's, oh well, see you, Francome, and that's it, man.
No, I am humbled and humiliated. But the great race, I think of all people talk about, you're on the races you rode, and 7 times champion, 1,000 winners and more.
I first met John McCririck. I went to a coursing meeting at Mid-Essex, the club was called, at Great Chesterford. And I had a dog running, and John McCririck was the coursing correspondent for the Sporting Life, which is just about the lowest rung on the ladder, I suppose. And he'd just taken over from Harry Arnold, the previous coursing correspondent, who'd done the job for about 40 years, and had died in a lay-by on his way back to Margate after reporting the Barbican Cup.
When you live in the East End of London, most of your contact with racing comes through betting shops. I mean, you don't actually get to see the real live animals. My contacts with racing, all in my younger days, were all through betting shops and the characters and the things that happened in betting shops. And I'll never forget being stood in our local bookies years ago before the big chains all started to take over, little backstreet bookies in the East End of London. And a fella walked in and he walked up to the counter and he said to the governor, he said, "Can I back an horse in here?" He went, "You what?" He went, "Can I back an horse in here?" He went, "Of course you fucking can." So the fella went to the door, opened it and went, "Come on, Dobbin."
And I think the sort of the great Francome story was that at some minor jump meeting, he'd tell it better than I can, but at some minor jump meeting, he and Steve Smith-Eccles were had up by the stewards. And Steve Smith-Eccles was called forward and put his hands behind his back as he was giving evidence, and Francome was standing right behind him. Francome and Steve Smith-Eccles' hands were going with nerves behind his back, and Francome, of course, undid his fly buttons and pressed into Smith-Eccles' hands the most horrific object, which I think that really illustrates Francome's sense of humour better than anything I could.
Well, on Channel 4 Racing, they covered Redcar. I do remember when this jockey was coming into the paddock, and on the back, the lads had put on ladies' tights, and he walked in, totally oblivious to it. He walked in, everybody was looking, laughing and sniggering. He didn't know what had been going on. What do you get up to in the weighing room?
Of course, I mean, the great thing about the weighing room is that nobody but jockeys and the valets allowed in. It doesn't matter whether you've ridden the worst race in the world, you've just got beaten on a 4-to-1 on shot, the trainer's trying to lynch you, the owner's after you. It's like a bolt hole.
The cuddly one, Jenny Pittman. Now, when you were beaten on short, how could you face her? How could you dare come back
well, now,
and face the cuddly one?
It's like a hole to a rabbit, the changing room. You see, in a situation like that, you dodge round her and you're in there, and she's too big to get through the hole, so you're there, and you know you're safe, and she tells everybody, send that little bugger out, but you won't move. You're locked in the toilet, and they come back, we haven't seen him. And she says, well, I've seen him, because I saw him go in there. Sorry, I haven't seen him. And you usually nip out, I mean, you look for it, it's the last race of the day, and you nip out the back way. But there's always something going on. Well, Martin Blackshaw was the best of all. I mean, he went over to France to ride, a brilliant jockey, and used to ride all of those French jockeys to sleep. But when he came in, he'd ridden a winner, he used to stand on the weighing room table, and of course they were years in front of us, they had the little camera, you know, showing the closed circuit, and he used to get all the jockeys around and slap his whip down on the table. He said, right, you little buggers. He said, now what? He said, I'll show you how to ride. I thought it was wonderful, frightened them all to death.
What else did you get up to, though? You see, we all think as punters, you're in there studying the form books. Who's going to lead in the race? I've got £5 in hand of him. You're worried and you're tense and our money, Grace, is at stake. Not you larking around like a schoolboy.
But that is it. Half the time you're larking around and you go out. I can remember one prime example. I rode this horse for a lovely woman called Judy Miller at Warwick. Great big fat lady, larger than life. Rode this old horse called General Ironside. And it was a 2 mile 5 novice handicap hurdle at Warwick. I just picked it up, saw it was a novice hurdle, went and rode the horse, evening racing, came back in and ran really well. It was favourite, but didn't get beaten 4 or 5 lengths or something. I thought she'd be delighted. She said, you know, how did it run? I said, this is a really nice horse, and it was, you know, big chasing type. I said it'd be really good, you know, give him a little bit of time. She turned around and it's packed this area. It's all the sort of also ran. She said, time? He's bloody 9 already. Of course, we'd all been messing around. I hadn't even looked to see how old it was. I just saw novice hurdle. It must be 4 years old.
One great day dawned, and I was working in the yard, and we had some very ordinary owners, nice ordinary people who saved a bit to have a horse in training. And one day the phone rang, and it was Mr. Hambro's Bank. And I came out to the yard, I said, Mr. Koenig, you know, on the phone we've got Mr. Hambro. Oh, he says, bollocks. So I said, I promise you. Mr. Hambro's private secretary on the phone wants to talk to you now. So in he went, the phone was halfway up the stairs, I remember. He stood to attention, you know. Mr. Hambro's private secretary on the phone, got a very difficult horse in Newmarket, not getting on too well. Mr. Koenig had a reputation for dealing with difficult horses. Would he take the horse and have it for a week or two and see how he got on with it? He'd be delighted. So down this horse came, and it was called Barb, and it was duly absolutely mad. It was all washed with sweat, and its eyes were out on organ stops. And after a month or two, old Mr. Koenig, who was a marvellous horseman, just fiddling around the lanes in the West Country, he got it settled. And then Christmas dawned. Phone call came, Mr. Hambro's private secretary. Could Mr. Hambro come round evening stables? Now, evening stables is something that only happens in the very big, smart stables, and all the lads rush around in white jackets. We'd never had evening stables in a month of Sundays. Could Mr. Hambro come round evening stables, see all the horses? He'd be there at 6:30. Well, I'd never seen people move so fast in your life. We'd only got 8 or 9 horses. They didn't have too much straw in the box. You've got to save some money somewhere, so the boxes were strawed up. And there was a car, I remember, we were taking apart in the middle of the yard. That was wheeled into the dung pit and covered with straw. Mrs. Koenig rushed off to the town and was cutting up curly cucumber sandwiches. And just on 6 o'clock, a Rolls Royce came in. You know the marvellous noise a Rolls Royce made. I never heard a noise like that on the gravel there. And out got Mr. Hambro, you know. So we showed him all 8 horses. He was used to going around Newmarket stable with about 60. And all the horses are stood to attention. And we keep running from one box to the other to show them. Little washed carrots which are held out for the horses. They'd never seen before in their lives, and they wouldn't eat them, I remember, because they'd never seen them. And Mr. Hambro was very impressed with it all. And back into the front room he came, where Mrs. Koenig was carving up still more curly cucumber sandwiches. We all fell over each other trying to hand him bits and pieces of food, you know. Was he pleased with his horse? Yes, he was delighted. But he said, there's just one thing, Mr. Koenig, I must tell you, you know, that this horse was bought with a contingency. And we could all see that Mr. Koenig had not a clue in the world what a contingency was. And we're trying to rescue him, you know. And he paused for a minute and he scratched his head. Well, he said, yeah, there's plenty of they buggers about these days, but if you slap a good blister on them and leave them in for a month, they're normally all right. And an absolutely bemused Mr. Hambro left the yard.
Now, you at Borough Hill Lad was, of course, a great horse for you. People, the old timers will look back to Golden Miller, but those of you in my era, there was only one, that was Arkle. And I do remember in the '64 Gold Cup, taking on Millhouse. I was a great Millhouse.
But how would he compare to horses these days?
Oh, he'd outrun. I know the old timers, whenever they have Golden Miller and Prince Regent, you rode Borough Hill Lad, probably the greatest horse that you ever rode, Desert Orchid, Red Rum, but none of them can stand beside Arkle. He was everything a National Hunt horse ever can be, the greatest ever. There will never be another Arkle in my lifetime, or even yours, greatest jockey.
One of the great characters when I first started training was Major Holiday, and he was a northerner. He'd made all his money, I think, out of jam and stuff, but he had an enormous stable in Newmarket, and a private trainer trained for him. I think Dick Hearn was the only one to survive, because everybody got fired by the Major in the end. And he had 16, 17, I think he had 17 trainers after the war. And one day, the story goes, old Major Holiday was being driven in his Rolls down Fordham Road in Newmarket. And as he passed his stable yard, there was an old boy standing outside sweeping up. But he stopped sweeping, he was leaning on a broom, and he was talking to two old girls. And the chauffeur drove the Major on, and they went off to his stud, and they had a look at a few horses. And when they came back, the old boy still leaning on the same broom outside the yard in the street, talking to another couple of old girls that walked by. So the Major pulled up the car, tapped on the connecting door, said to the chauffeur, just pull over. Wound down his window. He said, here you, leaning on the broom. He said, go into the yard, up the stairs, into the office, see the secretary, ask for 17 and 6, and I never want to see you again. 17 and 6 being the wage in those days. So he said, excuse me, Major. He said, do as I tell you. He said, go in the yard, up the steps, into the office, see the secretary, get 17 and 6, and I'll never want to see you again. He said, right, Major. But he didn't work for the Major at all, he worked for the council, and thereafter, whenever Major Holiday used to go by, this old boy used to say, hello, Major, smashing chap, the Major, gives you 17 and 6.
How as a jockey do you feel? Are you sort of secretly hoping so-and-so goes and falls and I can get the ride?
You wouldn't wish injury on anybody, but when somebody's... I can remember the start of the last season I rode, and I think I'd notched up 17 winners in 10 days for John Jenkins. And novice hurdle, 22 runners. I had a fall right in front of the field. Everything went over the top of me. And about an hour later, after I'd been to the ambulance room, and I crawled back into the waiting room to get changed, and Peter Scudamore, he said, you know what, he said, you've never seen jockeys move as fast in all your life. He said, you'd barely stopped rolling and the first horse had kicked you. He said they were round John Jenkins like flies round a jam pot, he said, trying to pick up rides. But of course, that's, you know, that's all part of the game.
It must be like footballers on the subs bench, mustn't
it?
Absolutely. They're on the subs bench. There's the start. They're hoping.
Absolutely. You're secretly praying that something happens. It's no good being a jockey if you're not having lots of rides. And the way to get lots of rides is when somebody else gets injured.
Because the great art of training for those people too was that if you got a bollocking, you must just take it. And the fatal thing to answer back or to explain. And one Sunday afternoon, I was having a nice quiet sleep, and the telephone rang, and it was Sir Reginald MacDonald Buchanan. Hello! So I thought, good afternoon, Sir Reginald MacDonald. What can I do for you? He said, if you're, because you forget with those old boys, they might be deaf and a bit muddly, but they've been a top man in their time, and he certainly knew how to give you a rocket. Sir Reginald said, if you're so idle that you can't be bothered, he said, if you're so conceited that you don't think you need, he said, if you're so smug and self-satisfied, he said, if you're so pleased with your little self that you don't think you need to ring after one of my horses have run, he said, next time, if you don't ring me within 1 hour of Ironside running his race, I will take all my horses away, all my wife's horses away, and all my son's horses away, and you'll be sweeping the streets as you deserve to. Is that quite clear? So I said, absolutely, Sir Reginald. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for telling me. Good afternoon. Well, I didn't train Ironside, Henry Cecil did. I saw Henry the next day on the heath. I said, if I was you, I'd ring the old man a bit quick, you know, he was just a bit scratchy yesterday.
Now, one thing I admire you and all the jockeys for is the bravery. It's not just saying this. You know, we criticise you're beating a short head and you didn't come late. You sit on 3/4 of a ton and see what it's like.
That's all right. It's when it's rolling on you. It's the problem.
If I sat on 3/4 of a ton as well.
Yeah.
One, I think of all the falls you had, the ones most remember, Golden Rapper in the National. Now, you were clear going to beaches. What happened with Golden Rapper?
Still got the lumps on the back of my hand to remind me of it. And again, it was the first time I'd ever seen the horse was when I walked into the paddock. And he'd been bought, Benson Hedges were doing a competition, and the winner was to have a runner in the National. And the horse that we had in mind had gone wrong, done a leg or something. And Fred went over to Ireland, bought Golden Rapper. So the first I see of this horse is when I walk into the paddock, and he was only about 15.3. I was riding bigger things than this when I was 12 years old. And then I thought, oh, well, he's either got two choices, either he jumps or he doesn't. I went round the inside, and he was like a cat, this horse. He went, never even touched a twig, all the way around the inside for a circuit, went all the way down to Beeches next time. I'm 3 lengths clear going to the Beeches, and this horse absolutely hit it spot on and never put his landing gear out. I've got this photograph of him, his nose is an inch from the ground, his front legs are tucked up underneath it, he just forgot to put his feet out. And the next thing I knew, I was waking up in Walton Hospital.
But there was another tremendous character in Newmarket about that time called Hughie Sidebottom. And Hughie only died about 4 or 5 years ago. But he was a very academic man. He'd been up at Cambridge, had extremely good career at Cambridge, was a very erudite man, but he was wayward and he loathed authority. And he took enormous pleasure always at cocking a snoop at any sort of authority. And he trained a few horses in Newmarket, mainly bad jumpers, and fiddled around with them, had the odd bet. And the 2 people he loathed most were Major Holiday, who he thought pompous, and Captain Boyd Rochford, the Queen's trainer, who he regarded as both pompous and stupid. And Captain Boyd Rochford had a healthy disrespect for Hughie as well, because he regarded him as a hopeless trainer. So both of them revelled in thoroughly disliking one another. And the great day dawned when Captain Boyd Rochford, who trained for a lot of American owners, the great day dawned when Captain Boyd Rochford was having this final trial before the Derby. And he booked the trial ground on the lime kilns, which is the most sacred bit of ground, which is only used for very special horses. And he wanted to know exactly how the 4 or 5 horses went together. And jockeys up, Harry Carr was there, and the American owner, Mrs. Guggenheim, was over, and the whole thing was laid on. And of course, dear old Hughie booked the trial ground for just a few minutes earlier with 2 or 3 very slow jumpers, and went up the gallop as slowly as he could, which meant that the captain's important Derby trial, they all had to sort of scoot round at the crucial moment round Hughie's very slow jumpers, you see, and much to Hughie's delight. So after this piece of work had been completely wrecked, dear old Hughie trotted up to the captain and said, "Everything going like a Swiss watch, Captain?" And the captain said, "No, it bloody well isn't," you know, and launched forth into how bad jumpers trained by idiosyncratic fools shouldn't be allowed on the heath, you see, which of course Hughie loved, you know, perked Hughie up no end. So in the evening, Hughie had a few people round, and after supper, they thought they'd just maybe gee up the captain a bit. I remember Lady Derby was one of them, and so they had a very enjoyable evening, and the captain used to go to bed absolutely smack on the nail at 9:30, you know. And so about 12:30, they thought it'd be time to give the captain a ring. So old Hughie rang up. I can't do it, but in an American accent, he got through, and Hughie said, a phone rang, and the voice said, "Hello, Captain Boyd Rochford speaking." So Hughie Sidebottom said, "This is the transatlantic operator speaking. Mrs. Guggenheim's trying to get hold of you. We're having trouble with your line. Kindly say after me, my bun has no currents in it." So to everybody's absolute delight, you know, old captain said, "And my bun has no currents in it." To which, of course, he said, "I beg your pardon, sir?" He said, "My bun has no currents in it." He said, "That's your fucking bad luck, you pompous arsehole." Slam the phone down.
How much do you have owners and trainers blaming you? Because at the end of the day, their money's at stake. They think it could have won, they could have ridden it, and you're to blame, or the jockeys are to blame.
Well, you know, it's difficult.
And what good excuses do you give? How do you come back with excuses, Grace, to cover up your incompetence?
The best excuse ever, there's no doubt about it, and it wasn't actually an excuse. A lad called Gordon Howie rode at Devon and Exeter one day. It was really foggy. He was 10 lengths clear going to the last, and we must have been, I was second and third with another lad, Graham Thorne, riding, and we must have been the only people who could see him. He's jumped the last, and he's gone, you know, he's still 10 lengths clear of us. A stag jumped over the fence, ran straight into him, knocked the horse and jockey to the ground. And of course we went on and Graham Thorne beat me. He was first, I was second. Of course when Gordon Howie came in, he was concussed a little bit, and he said, oh, this stag came out and knocked me over, and they said, oh yeah, you know, he's had one too many. But that's exactly what happened. Just bounced over the gate, knocked him down, and that was it.
Of course, there's no profession more irritating probably than training racehorses. If you're like me, only a medium-sized trainer, you've got 50 horses every day, you've got 20-odd lads and 40-odd owners, which is a combustible mixture for things that can go wrong. Every day it's a miracle that you get through the day without some disaster, you know. I think the nicest thing about training really is that if you've had a disaster today, you can't worry about it too long because there's another disaster tomorrow to take your mind off it. So all trainers are pretty bad-tempered. And I always have an assistant and a pupil assistant, and a good young trainer now, William Haggas, who's a very good trainer and a very hard-working man. He came to me as pupil, and I trained horses for his father. And his father said, you know, young William's had a easy time, you know, been to smart public school and one thing and another. He just wants chasing around a bit, and you know, I hope he'll start training one day. So William came along, and I said, now then, William, you know, if you're going to get on with me, the big thing is that I've never ever been late since I left school. I've never been late, so you can never be late. There is no excuse for being late in the morning ever. Absolutely, sir. You know, rely on me. I shall be most reliable. So about 6 days went by, and of course, young William's late. So I said to the assistant trainer, I said, you better go and wake that boy up, you know. So went into the town where he lived, woke him up. Young William came running in, all apologies. I said, William, you know, I said, you've been here 6 days and you've been late. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but I've not been late in 20 odd. So it's about 14,000 days before you can be late again. Do you understand? Absolutely, so it won't happen again, you can rely on me. 2 days went by, no William, you know. And it was work morning, and owners were coming out, and I'd got to get off racing at 9:30, and I got enough on my plate without having to wake William up. So I said to the assistant trainer, I said, just run me down, I'll go and collect my papers, and I'll wake him up. So I collected the papers, and it turned out he lived in one of the terraced houses in Newmarket, long terrace street, and he was in number 36. So I tried to get into the window of number 36, and I couldn't shift the window. I couldn't get up high enough. So I went round the back, and it's quite hard to work out, you know, with that odd numbering either side of the street, which number 36 is. So I climbed over this fence, and there was a kitchen window, and I just eased the kitchen window up, and there was an immaculate basin, all polished and clean. And you've got to sort of crawl in over the taps, you know. And as I looked up, there was an elderly woman in a hairnet there. I said, is this number 36? She said, no, it is not. I'm very sorry, madam. Which is number? She said, next door. So I reversed out through over her fence, eased up the kitchen window next door. And of course, I know I'm in the right spot because there's a mountain of congealed, filthy washing up in the basin, you know, just the sort of place where 3 or 4 young lads would be sharing, you know. So I climbed out over the basin, picked up a saucepan full of filthy water, and I could hear one of those perpetual alarms going halfway up the stairs. I went up the stairs as quiet as I could. In off the right, halfway up the stairs, was one bedroom. I opened the door very quietly. This lad had only been working for me 6 or 7 days. Fast asleep, little black hair, T-shirt on a camp bed. I got hold of the back of his hair and his T-shirt like that. I smacked his head against the wall. I said, you idle little bastard, and turned him round, and I'd never seen the fellow before in my life. I could hear the coroner, you know, saying, what did you do? So I said, where does William Haggas? He's in the next door. So I climbed down through the next. And he'd just taken a bit of my thigh, you know. And I climbed up there. Sure enough, at the top of the stairs this time, there was a little bed, and there's poor little William fast asleep, you know. I just poured that saucepan, filthy water all over his head. And as he stood up, I went whang like that, you know, felled him, you know, to his knees. I said, don't you ever fucking be late again. So the bent saucepan they gave him mounted when he got married on a wooden plaque. But of course, fear is a wonderful thing, and he was never ever late again. You know, it's a wonderful spur to hard work.
John, I know you wind me up. You call me the greatest, and it's a wind up. But really, who were the great jockeys that stick in your mind more than any?
I think George Moore. He came over in about 66, 67 from Australia, rode Royal Palace, and the man's hands. I'm not a great. I don't pretend to be a great judge.
Did it come
but
from a
George.
betting point of view?
No. To watch George Moore and a Royal Palace. Ever you see Royal Palace? He won 130 favourite. He won the 2000 his first time out for Merlers. Went on and won the Derby. And the hands of George Moore, the beautiful, beautiful hand. He was a super. Just to watch George Moore ride. You can go and give the Pigots, and you can go and give the Dunwoodies and the Scudamores and the Gordon Richards, all those kind of people. Yes, but to me, the top jockey, apart from you, was George Moore. George Moore was beautiful to watch. But as a bookmaker, I was a bookmaker for many years, and a tic-tac, Clark, Formula, that sort of thing. You look for jockeys to lay. In other words, you don't want to know the great jockeys, ones who the public think are very good, but in fact aren't quite up to it. I won't mention a name, but there was one jockey who rode...
mention a name.
Well, I used to think Sandy Barclay. Now, poor old Sandy, he had a great reputation, came down from Scotland and was made #1 jockey for Noel Merlers. Noel Merlers was the top trainer. But he was running these great big horses. And we used to think this is the chance, really. We soon cottoned on that Sandy Barclay wasn't up to riding these great big, who needed a lot of control, a lot of handling, lay him. And the other one, in his early days, was Steve Crawford. Now, he came over in '79, you remember he won a Marquis Universal, the first race at Salisbury. And I was a bookmaker in those days, and we could see straight away that he wasn't all he was cracked up to be. He rode at Epsom at the spring meeting. I don't know if there's any films of it. It was pathetic. He was like a pea on a drum. He adapted his style. But for a bookmaker, the great thing is to cotton onto a jockey who is not as good as the public say. See, I always think a jockey is really great when the public put down, they'll do it now, Dunwoodies mounts in doubles and trebles, in Maguire's horses, doubles and trebles. They'll go and put it down for Dettori's horses. They won't do it for Leicester now. So in other words, when they do that...
Never has 3 rides in an afternoon now.
No, but you've cracked it when they put down your actual names. And the bookmaker, we want to get to know the jockeys who are just below that. The public haven't cottoned on yet that they're not really up to. You've got a chance that gives you an extra chance because the horses are all short. Every horse you rode was a shorter price than it ought to have been because you were on it. Same as the Tory now.
So the following Saturday, a fellow walks in up to the counter again and they go to see, yes mate, he went, back to fight the 2 winner. No. Back to fight the 1 winner. No. Back to five balls accumulator, and he's come out. He went, no. But back to five. Oh, bollocks to this. He went, look. He said, well, I won a couple. Oh, thanks a lot. And he was on his way out the shop. He said, one of the punters, he said, easy. And the nice fella, the governor, isn't he? She said, he went, she said, just give me £100. He said, no, coming here to tell him I've just back to 5-ton truck into his roller.
The circumstances have changed, haven't they? I mean, years ago, before you had the starting stalls, no RTS. I can remember when I began, you walked into the weighing room and, there's certain things, everybody said, don't go at Jeff King's inside. I mean, he was the best jockey I ever saw. Him
Yes.
and David Mull,
Yes.
don't go at Jeff King's inside. It was like, you know, they say to the Eskimo kids, don't eat the yellow snow. Racing,
Don't eat the yellow snow.
Racing, it was don't go at Jeff King's inside. And I can remember it never ever went near to going up his inside until one day at Fontwell, we were 20 lengths behind the rest of the field. Turned for home, no chance of winning. He's in the middle of the course, and I went to go up his inside, and I thought, no, remember, don't go at Jeff King's inside. So I went up his outside, and he looked round, and he came right across, stuck me through the wing, and I've taken all the skin off them and back of my hand, dislocated a finger, skin off me. This was before you had back pads. And eventually walked back in, come out of the ambulance room, and I'm really annoyed, and I went up to him and I said, you know, what do you do that for? And he just turned around and he said, practice. Just like that. I mean, you know, but that's what it was like years ago.
Because one of the worst things that happens to all trainers is the dreaded virus or coughing, you know. And I've got a good girl who works for me now. She's been with me, she's been with me years. But she always tells the story that her first day riding out for us was in sort of March or April, just when the flat racing season's beginning to get going. All the owners are ringing up asking when their horses are going to run. And mine had just started to cough. And that's sort of 8 or 10 weeks off, you know. And I suppose I was in a terrible mood, an unforgiving mood. And this poor girl was riding out towards the back of the string. And the key thing, you know, is one of the first signs is whether they cough, whether they've got a dirty nose, whether they're dull. And you sort of give them a jog, and if you don't like the look of them first thing in the morning, you send in that one, and then you give them another jog, and the ones that are cough, they go in, and so on. And your depleted string is left with about 1 or 2 to go the full trip, you know, which is a nightmare. Anyway, this poor little girl's riding out of the back of the string, terrified. And when they pull up after their first trot, you know, I say, cough, Dickie, and he says, 8, you, 9, 15, sir, and a filthy, dirty nose. 23, you know, and I'm getting crosser and crosser and crosser, and there's the poor new girl at the back, and of course she's got no idea what they're saying 23, 4 or 18, you know, so she's looking absolutely terrified. So I said, well, she said, hey. So, how many? So she went, hey. So the lad behind says, cough. So she went, I said, for fuck's sake, I've got enough horses coughing here without you, for God's sake.
But why is it that the senior jockeys, you were always on the inside, Skew always on the inside, Dunwoody nearly, they haven't got a divine right to it. There's no starting stalls, they're not drawn there. So is it sort of unsaid in the weighing room, the champion jockey or the top jockey, he has got his place there, or how
Not
is
really,
it done?
some people are happy. I mean, some trainers don't like their horses going around the inside. Some prefer them in the middle. Personally, I think you go around the inside, provided the ground's okay, you go around the inside, it's a shorter distance, and you've only got one horse in front of you that's going to go one way or the other. You know where it's going to go, it can only go one way.
Years ago, we were having a terrible time. And we were very short-staffed, and winter and frost, and it's a hard job, you know, stable lads' job, it's a hard job. And we were really battling away, and trainer down the road's just started with a big string and a wealthy Arab owner, and he's paying over the odds, and you know, and everybody's handing their notice, and the ones that are left have got more work still to do, you know. The thing's a nightmare, and Christmas is just coming up, and we'd had a bad season, and Henry Cecil's lads were all getting in their pool, you know, which is from the winner's money. They were all getting £800 apiece. And mine were getting £28 and 6pence, and you know, there was general sort of unrest everywhere. I was in a terrible mood, and I'd handed round the Christmas bonus, and we'd had such a bad year that instead of it being from the owners, it's all from me, you know, and I've lost a fortune for the year, and nobody said thank you, because of course I've been in such a terrible mood, no one's dared to say thank you, you see. So of course I went back to the office, and I said, that's it, I'm never giving these buggers anything else again. Handed out all that money out of my own pocket. No one's even said thank you, because they couldn't have said thank you because I was in such a